The girl had always been the kind who moved through the world like a whisper, never loud enough to disturb, never fierce enough to demand her place. She carried her days in silence, her work in obedience, her heart in hidden corners that no one ever tried to see. Her stepfamily, cruel and calculating, despised her for her gentleness, twisting her quiet nature into something they called weakness. To the villagers, she was not only useless but cursed, a shadow walking among them, an omen of misfortune. They had many words for her, none of them kind, and she bore them all without protest, for even when the pain cut deep, she had learned that silence was safer than defiance. The people of the village laughed at her bowed head, her tired steps, her eyes that often lingered on the sky rather than the earth. They whispered that she carried bad luck in her bones and misfortune in her breath. Children mimicked her, hurling taunts the way they threw stones into the river. Elders shook their heads at her, as though she was the reason their harvest failed or their animals fell sick. Even when she tried to help, to offer her hands where work was heavy, they shoved her aside as though her touch would rot what she carried. She had no one to defend her, no mother to shield her, no father to speak for her. Her stepmother and stepsister encouraged the cruelty, weaving lies into gossip, making certain no one ever saw her as anything but a burden. It was during the season of the great fires, when the village lit flames to mark the turning of the moon, that their cruelty reached a sharper edge. The night was meant for celebration, for dancing and feasting, for songs rising with the sparks that leapt into the dark. Yet for her, there was no welcome, no laughter, only the eyes of people who wanted to see her suffer. A cruel idea grew among them, whispered at first, then spoken aloud, then cheered as though it was a game. The girl should carry a torch from dusk until dawn. Not merely carry it, but hold it high, so the flame burned above her head like a crown she did not deserve. If she faltered, if the flame went out, they said misfortune would descend upon the village and all blame would rest on her. When the festival night came, they dragged her into the circle of firelight, her arms trembling before the task even began. They pressed a long wooden torch into her palms, its cloth-wrapped head dripping with oil, already lit so that the flame roared angrily in the night air. The heat licked at her face, searing her skin, its smoke biting her eyes until they watered. She wanted to drop it, to run, but the ring of villagers stood around her, mocking, jeering, clapping their hands as though she were the entertainment of the evening. Her stepmother smiled with venom in her eyes, pleased to see her suffering turned into spectacle. The girl swallowed her fear, her hands tightening around the torch though its weight pressed down on her small frame. The hours stretched endlessly. The torch grew heavier with every passing moment, and her arms ached as though the bones might splinter under the burden. Sparks fell onto her skin, burning tiny holes into her dress. Sweat slid down her forehead and stung her eyes, but still she endured, because she knew the villagers would not allow her to stop. They circled her with cruel delight, chanting songs not of joy but of mockery, daring the flame to consume her. Above her, the moon watched, silver and distant, while the torchlight flared like a false sun she was condemned to carry. What none of them saw, what none of them even considered, was that the fire was listening. The crackle of the torch was not just wood and oil burning away, it was a voice, low and waiting, restless to speak. The girl did not know this yet, did not understand that her suffering was being carved into the air like a story unfolding. All she knew in that moment was pain, loneliness, and the sharp laughter of those who wanted her broken. Still, even in the cruelty, her spirit did not bend. She carried the torch as she was told, humble and quiet, her eyes lifted toward the night sky as though she trusted something beyond them to see her struggle. And the night, vast and endless, indeed was watching. The torch hissed and crackled in her hands, its fire twisting upward like a hungry tongue against the dark. The girl's arms shook beneath its weight, her body trembling, though she tried to steady herself. Around her, the laughter of the villagers rose, sharp and cruel, filling the night air as thick as the smoke. Children darted close, pointing their little fingers at her, mocking her unsteady stance. They imitated her strained breathing, bent their backs and swayed with exaggerated groans, delighting in their performance. Their high-pitched giggles echoed across the firelit circle, each one cutting deeper than the last. She could not shield her ears, could not turn her eyes away, for the torch demanded both hands and her full attention. All she could do was stand there, rigid and suffering, while their mockery swirled around her like a storm. The adults were no kinder. Some sneered openly, crossing their arms as if her struggle was nothing more than proof of her weakness. Others whispered just loud enough for her to hear, their voices dripping with contempt. "She won't last until midnight," one muttered. "The cursed girl will let the fire die and then we'll all pay the price." Another snickered, adding, Better to let the fire eat her first. That way she'll do us one good service before she's gone. Each whisper was meant to crush her, and though she kept her gaze fixed on the flame, their words pressed heavy on her chest, as suffocating as the smoke that curled around her. The night was long and each moment stretched into agony. Sweat rolled down her face, dripping onto her hands where it stung against the heat of the torch. Her fingers cramped, her arms screamed, her back burned with the strain. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, but there was no relief, no moment of peace. Every movement, every falter, brought a fresh wave of laughter from the crowd. "Look! She stumbles like a drunkard," a young man shouted, his voice carrying over the crackling fire. The others roared with approval, clapping and whistling as though she were a performer on some cruel stage. Even the elders, who should have been wise enough to stop the torment, shook their heads and muttered curses about her bringing misfortune. Her stepmother and stepsister stood at the front of the crowd, their faces glowing in the firelight. The stepmother's smile was cold and triumphant, her eyes sharp with delight. The stepsister whispered into her ear, both of them laughing quietly at the sight of the girl's trembling arms. To them this was victory. The girl's suffering was not only entertainment but proof that she was beneath them, a cursed shadow to be mocked and destroyed. The stepmother's voice rose above the others, sharp and cutting. "Hold it higher. Do you want us all to burn because of your weakness? Or is that your plan to drag us into your curse?" The girl bit her lip until it bled, swallowing her tears. She said nothing because no word she spoke would be believed, no plea she made would be heard. As the night deepened, the whispers grew darker. Some villagers began to place cruel bets. "She won't last an hour longer," said one, tossing a pebble at her feet. "By the time the stars shift, she'll be ash." Another laughed. "No, no. She'll drop it before then, and when she does, the fire will leap to her dress. Then we'll see if she burns as quickly as her cursed mother did." The words twisted in her ears, filling her with a hollow ache. She had no memory of her mother's death, only the bitterness with which others spoke of it, as though even her mother's end had been shameful. The villagers' cruelty was relentless, and she bore it like a weight as heavy as the torch itself. The children grew bolder, creeping closer to her, tossing handfuls of dust and pebbles at her bare feet. They shouted chants, circling her like wild dogs around prey. "Burn, cursed one! Burn before sunrise!" Their small voices carried venom taught by their elders, hatred handed down like a ritual. She wanted to weep, to cry out that she was not cursed, that she was just a girl who wanted kindness, but the words froze in her throat. To speak would be to give them more reasons to laugh, more weapons to twist against her. And so she stood in silence, her eyes fixed on the flame that danced and hissed above her, her only companion in the darkness. Still, even as her body trembled, even as her spirit bent beneath the weight of their scorn, something stirred within her. The fire's crackle seemed to shift, its sound threading itself through their cruel laughter like a whisper she almost understood. It was faint, hidden beneath the jeers and sneers, but it was there. The torch was not merely wood and flame, it was alive, listening, waiting. The villagers thought the night was theirs, their laughter unchallenged, their cruelty without consequence. But the flame in her hands had begun to pay attention, and the sky above was vast and watchful. She did not yet know what was coming, but in her silence, in her endurance, she had already called it closer. The night stretched on endlessly, each moment heavy with the weight of fire in her arms. The torch flared and hissed, its flames licking upward, glowing against the darkness like a cruel crown she could not set aside. She moved through the open fields beyond the village, her bare feet pressing against the cold earth, but even the chill of the ground could not cool the burning that scorched her arms and shoulders. Every step felt longer than the last, as though time itself had slowed to mock her, forcing her to suffer with no promise of relief. The laughter of the villagers had faded into the distance, but their cruel voices still echoed in her mind. She carried not only the torch but also their hatred, their whispers, their jeers. The smoke stung her eyes, blinding her with hot streams of tears that made her stumble over stones and roots. When she lifted her hand to wipe them away, the torch nearly wavered, and fear shot through her chest like a dagger. If she dropped it, if she let the flame falter, they would call her cursed again, accuse her of trying to destroy them. Her body shook, her breath came in shallow bursts, but still she clutched the wooden staff with both hands, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fail. Her arms were raw, her skin blistered, but she tightened her grip as though her very soul were bound to the torch. She crossed the fields where the tall grasses whispered in the night wind, their tips brushing her legs, bending gently as though bowing to her struggle. Beyond the fields lay the narrow paths that twisted toward the river and back again, Paths she had walked many times in daylight but which now felt foreign, transformed by the moon's pale glow. Shadows shifted across her path, stretching long and sharp, but she pressed forward. Every breath was laced with smoke, filling her chest with a bitter heaviness. She coughed, staggered, but kept walking, the fire's light spilling behind her like a trail through the darkness. Her back ached, her shoulders burned, yet she would not surrender. For though the torch was her punishment, it was also her test. With each passing hour, she began to sense that it was more than the villagers' cruelty she carried. There was something in the flame itself, something ancient, heavy with meaning. It flickered as if alive, as though listening to her silence, watching her endurance. The girl felt her spirit stretch thin, but she clung to the thought that there must be an end, that dawn would come, that she would not burn forever in this endless night. The animals of the night stirred around her. An owl called from a distant tree, its cry low and mournful, as though singing for her suffering. Crickets chirped in waves, rising and falling like breaths in the dark. A fox darted across the path, pausing only to stare at the light she carried before vanishing into the grass. Even the creatures seemed to recognize the strangeness of her burden, the way the fire burned too brightly, too fiercely for an ordinary torch. It was as though the world itself was watching her, silently bearing witness to her walk through pain and smoke. Her legs grew heavier with each step. Her knees wobbled, her feet bled from cuts and scrapes where sharp stones pierced her skin. The earth drank her blood quietly, yet she did not cry out. The torch weighed more with every passing minute, as if it fed on her strength, growing heavier the longer she carried it. She thought of her late mother, of how her presence had once been a shield against cruelty. If her mother still lived, no one would have dared to force her into such torment. That thought brought a fresh wave of pain, not from the torch but from her heart. Still she refused to let her grief break her. Instead, she carried it as she carried the flame, silently, stubbornly, step after step. The moon rode high above her, silver and solemn, its light mingling with the glow of the fire. She lifted her head once, meeting its gaze, and in that moment she felt less alone. Though the villagers had cast her out, though they wished her broken and burned, the sky itself seemed to see her. The stars glimmered faintly, flickering like sparks of encouragement, as if whispering that her endurance mattered, that her suffering would not be wasted. She lowered her head again, swallowing her tears, and pressed on. By the time the fields gave way to open ground once more, her body was nearly spent. Her shoulders slumped, her arms quivered violently, and her lips were cracked from thirst. But the fire had not died, nor had she dropped it. Every moment was agony, but beneath the pain was something harder, sharper, stronger, defiance. Though they had meant to break her, to watch her stumble and fall, she had given them nothing but silence and strength. They had mocked her name, called her cursed, but she bore the torch as though it were a crown of fire. And somewhere deep within her, she knew the night was not endless. Dawn would come, and when it did, the flame she carried would remember everything. The villagers' jeers rose like a chorus of malice, echoing across the darkened fields. They followed her closely, their feet crunching against the gravel and dry grass, their shadows flickering in the torchlight like dark wraiths. Children ran ahead, hurling small stones that bounced harmlessly off the ground near her, yet each one stung with the weight of intent. Adults laughed cruelly, calling her names meant to wound, meant to break her spirit as the fire burned heavier in her arms. Her shoulders ached beyond measure, the weight of the torch nearly unbearable, yet she held it high, determined not to falter before their cruelty. Her stepmother strode alongside, her expression twisted in cruel amusement. She wore her satisfaction openly, eyes glinting with the hope that the flames would leave marks upon the girl's skin, a permanent testament to their mockery. "Lower it, girl. Bend and feel the burn you deserve," she hissed. But the girl did not kneel. She did not cry out. She gritted her teeth, feeling the searing heat against her arms and palms, yet refusing to submit. Each step she took was an act of silent defiance, a message to all that no flame, no insult, no stone could bend her will. The villagers pressed closer, forming a ring around her as if she were a beast being driven to the pyre. Stones clattered against the earth, some bouncing off the torch's thick wooden staff, sparks leaping in the air with each impact. Yet none touched her, and in that strange, impossible moment, the fire seemed to respond to her endurance. It flared higher when a stone came too near, casting a halo of light that pushed the shadows of the mockers back. Their faces, once filled with glee, began to show flickers of uncertainty as they realized the fire was no ordinary flame. "Bow, girl. Bow and take your punishment," a man shouted, swinging a fistful of pebbles. She did not. She moved forward, head held high, the fire reflecting in her dark, unwavering eyes. Sweat ran down her face, mixing with the soot and ash that floated in the torchlight, yet she did not blink. Her hands, blistered and raw, gripped the staff with a strength she did not fully understand. She was no longer merely carrying a torch. She carried the weight of every slight, every cruel word, every ill intention cast upon her. Each flame that licked her skin seemed to burn not her, but their hatred, their fear, their need to dominate. Her stepmother's smirk faltered slightly as she noticed the fire dancing differently, responding to the girl's endurance, bending and twisting almost as if it had its own will. "It cannot be," she spat, her voice trembling. She hurled a larger stone, aiming to hit both the girl and the torch, hoping to extinguish it and break her courage. But the stone arced through the night and landed harmlessly behind the girl, leaving the torch blazing ever brighter. The villagers gasped, whispering among themselves, their confidence waning as the fire cast their shadows long and thin, making them appear smaller, weaker, insignificant before the girl's quiet defiance. The girl stumbled once, her legs heavy from the strain, but she forced herself upright. Every fiber of her being ached. Muscles burned, joints screamed, and blisters wept from the heat of the torch. Her chest heaved with exertion, but she inhaled deeply, centering herself. She imagined her mother's gentle hands upon her head, her mother's whispered prayers, her mother's voice telling her that strength often comes from enduring what seems unbearable. The memory bolstered her, as if the ancestors themselves whispered through the leaves, through the wind, through the flickering flames, that she would not fall tonight. The villagers' shouts grew frantic, their stones more frequent, but the girl moved as if through a trance. Each step was measured, deliberate, almost sacred. She began to notice a rhythm in the chaos, a harmony between the fire, her footsteps, and the dark night. The torch's glow reflected off the leaves of the trees, off the walls of the huts, off the faces twisted in rage and fear. Yet the flame stayed steady, unwavering, answering only to her will, and with each step, the hatred cast at her seemed to dissipate into the smoke rising from the burning wood. Her stepmother's eyes widened in disbelief. She should be burned. Scorched, she screamed, but the words lacked power. Something intangible had shifted. The air itself hummed with a strange energy, and the villagers could feel it pressing against their hearts. Fear, a new and unfamiliar weight, replaced their laughter. The girl's endurance had transformed the punishment into something extraordinary. The torch no longer merely punished her. It revealed the truth of her resilience, the purity of her heart, the strength of a will untouched by cruelty. Hours seemed to pass in slow motion, the night stretching into a trial of fire and spirit. Each stone thrown, each jeer shouted, each attempt to break her resolve was met not with defeat, but with steady, unyielding strength. She was no longer merely a girl forced to carry a torch. She had become a beacon, a living testament to courage, endurance, and the unseen power that protected those who were innocent yet oppressed. The villagers watched, their voices fading to whispers, realizing that they were witnessing something beyond human comprehension, a miracle wrought from suffering and steadfastness. By the time the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon, her arms burned, her feet were raw, and her body trembled with exhaustion. Yet she remained upright, torch held high, the fire illuminating her figure like a celestial crown. The villagers fell silent, some kneeling in awe, some stepping back in fear, and her stepmother shrank under the weight of a guilt she could not comprehend. The cruel test had failed. The girl had endured, and the torch had answered her resilience with a blazing proclamation that would linger long after the night ended. The night deepened, thick and heavy, with only the girl and the relentless torch at its center. Her arms trembled from the weight and the unceasing heat, but she did not lower it. Around her, the villagers slunk behind the shadows, their laughter long gone, replaced by whispers of unease. Every step she took left the ground faintly illuminated by the torchlight, and as the moon reached its zenith, a transformation began that none could have anticipated. The flame, once an ordinary punishment, now took on an otherworldly glow. It started subtly, a warmth more vivid, a light that cut through the darkness more sharply than any earthly fire. The villagers blinked, unsure if their eyes deceived them. But soon the glow grew steadier, more radiant, no longer dancing with the whim of the wind. It burned with the constancy of a star, casting a clear, unwavering light across the path. The shadows that once hid the cruel faces of her tormentors retreated, shrinking as the brilliance intensified. The girl's figure seemed to stand taller, a silhouette crowned by this extraordinary flame, unmoved by the stones thrown in contempt and by the sneers that had once sought to humiliate her. She felt the fire respond to something deeper within her, a silent strength, a purity of heart, and the whispered prayers she had muttered when no one watched. The torch was no longer a simple instrument of punishment, it had become a reflection of her spirit. The heat no longer scorched painfully but seemed to harmonize with her own inner energy, steadying her trembling arms. Around her, the night seemed alive with anticipation. Trees swayed as if bowing to the glow, even the wind carried a reverent hush, leaving the murmurs of the villagers as faint as distant echoes. The villagers, initially mocking, now watched in a mixture of fear and awe. Every stone they flung was stopped midair, as if the torch's strange glow projected a protective barrier around her. Their faces twisted in disbelief. How could a girl, punished and humiliated, wield a fire that neither faltered nor dimmed? Whispers ran through the crowd. "It is not her power, it is the ancestors," some murmured. Others shook their heads, trying to rationalize, but logic fell short under the celestial light of the torch. Even the stepmother, who had orchestrated the entire punishment, felt her resolve crumble. Her cruel eyes, so long accustomed to control, widened in fear. The flame did not merely illuminate, it judged, it exposed, it revealed. The girl's endurance had transformed the torch into something sacred. Every flicker that once suggested weakness now proclaimed resilience. The villagers began to step back unconsciously, a collective acknowledgement of a power they could neither grasp nor challenge. The strange glow did more than dazzle, it began to write across the sky. Lines of light stretched from the torch's flame, forming letters that shimmered faintly in the moonlit air. Names appeared, those of the cruel, those who had forced the girl into this ordeal. The writing was ethereal yet undeniable, burning with a gentle heat that was felt in the hearts of the guilty. Fear gripped them. They attempted to deny, to look away, but the glow continued, unyielding. The torch had become a medium, a celestial messenger, a force that bore witness to their malice. With each step, the letters became clearer, floating above the villagers' heads, a luminous testament to their misdeeds. The girl, walking with unbroken composure, seemed both mortal and divine at once. Her face reflected calm resolve, eyes fixed forward, aware yet detached from the chaos that erupted around her. The stepmother shrieked, pointing at the glowing names in the sky, realizing that every ounce of cruelty she had poured into the girl now returned as a vivid, undeniable mark of accountability. The torch's flame did not falter, even as the night's chill seeped into the villagers' bones. Its light grew warmer, brighter, not consuming the girl but empowering her. It was as if the ancestors themselves had guided the fire, transforming punishment into revelation. The air pulsed with energy, and every flicker of the torch illuminated the truth. The girl's heart, though burdened by cruelty, remained untainted. Around her, the night became a cathedral of firelight, a testament to endurance, and an indelible lesson to all who had sought to humiliate her. Hours passed, though the sensation of time seemed suspended in the glow. Each step she took left a trail of light, guiding not only her path but illuminating the hidden intentions of those who had wronged her. Fear replaced scorn, reverence replaced laughter. The villagers' whispers turned to gasps. Some fell to their knees, awed by a power they could neither challenge nor ignore. The stepmother's hands shook, her voice caught in her throat as the torch's light revealed everything she had hoped to hide. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared, the torch's flame remained steady, a radiant emblem of endurance and revelation. The moon, full and luminous above, seemed to nod in approval, amplifying the brilliance of the fire. The girl, though exhausted and blistered, stood upright, her head held high, arms extended in a gesture of unwavering defiance and silent triumph. The strange glow had become a bridge between the mortal and the divine, between suffering and vindication. Every cruel intention thrown at her had been transformed, and every act of endurance rewarded. The villagers, their faces pale with awe and fear, realized that the torch's fire was not mere flame but a reflection of truth. The night had witnessed the extraordinary. A humble girl, oppressed and mocked, wielding a burning testament to justice, endurance, and the unbreakable strength of an innocent heart. As the girl trudged onward, her arms ached, her palms blistered, and the torch's heat seared her skin, yet she did not falter. The villagers had begun to notice that this night was unlike any other. Their jeers had softened into uneasy murmurs, their laughter silenced by an unexplainable tension in the air. Then, without warning, the torch responded to something far beyond mortal comprehension. Tiny sparks began to rise from its flame, floating upward into the darkness above. At first, the sparks were faint, delicate specks that twinkled like distant stars. Some villagers rubbed their eyes, thinking they must be seeing things, while others whispered prayers to ward off what they suspected was witchcraft. But soon the sparks multiplied, twirling and dancing as if guided by an invisible hand. They ascended higher, and the smoke from the torch, thick and curling, began to gather around the sparks, forming shapes that were more defined than any ordinary smoke could create. The shapes began to resemble letters, but they were not the girl's own doing. The flame itself seemed to be communicating. Villagers gasped, frozen in place, as the smoke patterns morphed into words, names, accusations, and confessions of hidden sins that had been long buried in fear and shame. Mothers clutched their children, elders stepped back, and even the bravest men felt a chill run down their spines. The torch had transcended its role as a mere instrument of punishment. It had become a messenger, speaking with a divine authority none dared to question. The girl, though weary, felt a calm strength flow through her. She understood that the fire, the smoke, and the sparks were not harming her. Instead, they were transforming her suffering into revelation. Each spark that rose was a symbol of truth, a beacon exposing the corruption, greed, and cruelty of the villagers who had sought to humiliate her. The sky above her became a canvas, the night a stage, and the villagers unwitting actors in a play written by fate and guided by unseen ancestral forces. The shapes in the smoke grew larger, more detailed, forming faces, names, and deeds. The villagers recognized themselves and one another in the sky, their secrets now visible for all to see. Panic rippled through the crowd, some pointing at the ethereal images in disbelief, others falling to their knees in terror. No one dared approach the girl. She was no longer merely a victim, but a conduit for cosmic justice. Even the stepmother, who had orchestrated the girl's torment, trembled. Her hands shook as she realized that every act of cruelty she had inflicted that night would be displayed before the entire village. The torch's flame illuminated her misdeeds in the smoke above, making them undeniable. Her stepsister, who had jeered and pushed the girl to her limits, hid her face in horror as her own shame was cast into the sky, impossible to ignore or deny. The villagers fell silent, the only sounds being the faint crackle of the torch and the gentle whisper of the wind guiding the sparks higher. Birds perched in the nearby trees had stopped singing, sensing the gravity of the moment. Even the animals seemed to hold their breath, as though the natural world itself recognized the significance of the events unfolding below. The torch's light, combined with the moon above, created a surreal scene where the boundary between the mortal and the divine blurred. As the sparks continued to rise, the smoke's forms shifted from names and deeds to symbols of judgment, flames, scales, and celestial signs that spoke of accountability beyond human law. The villagers could only watch, awestruck and humbled, as the torch's flame performed what no human tribunal could. It revealed the truth with undeniable clarity. Those who had mocked, abused, or threatened the girl felt the weight of their sins pressing upon them, the fire in the sky acting as a mirror to their own hearts. The girl's endurance and humility became evident to all who watched. Every step she took left the ground faintly glowing, and every spark that rose into the sky carried with it a lesson in patience, resilience, and the power of purity. The once cruel villagers were now confronted with the consequences of their actions, helpless under the illumination of a force far beyond their understanding. Hours seemed to pass, though time felt suspended in the magic of the night. The sparks danced and wove intricate patterns, telling stories of greed, envy, betrayal, and malice. Villagers' faces turned pale, some dropping to their knees in shame, others covering their eyes in terror. None could dispute what they saw. The girl's suffering had been transformed into a celestial revelation, an eternal record of their sins that no one could ignore or erase. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the sky remained etched with the torch's testimony. The sparks slowly faded, yet the impression of what had occurred lingered, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of all who had witnessed it. The girl, standing tall and calm, carried the torch steadily, her spirit unbroken, her humility intact. The villagers now understood that what they had intended as punishment had become a vehicle of justice, a reminder that cruelty cannot hide in darkness, it will always be revealed. The night concluded not with destruction of the innocent, but with the illumination of truth. The torch, the sparks, and the smoke had done what human eyes alone could not. It exposed the guilty and elevated the pure. And the girl, the humble bearer of the flame, had proven that resilience, faith, and quiet strength can command forces greater than fear, cruelty, or mockery. The sparks and smoke that had risen from the torch began to shift and sharpen, forming unmistakable letters against the night sky. Each flickering ember stretched and twisted, aligning perfectly to create names that glowed like molten gold. Villagers craned their necks, gasping as the first names appeared, hovering high above them with a heat that seemed almost tangible. The letters blazed with an ethereal fire, illuminating the terrified faces below and casting long, wavering shadows across the ground. The girl held the torch steadily, though her arms burned and sweat trickled down her temples. She did not shout, nor did she wave the flame. It was as though the torch had its own will, guided by the unseen spirits who had chosen her as their vessel. The first name appeared, one of the men who had thrown stones at her during past humiliations. He froze, eyes wide, as his own name glowed in fiery script above him. Panic gripped him as he realized the flame did not lie, that the burning letters were not illusions but undeniable truths. One by one, names continued to appear. They belonged to those who had mocked her, the elders who had whispered cruel judgments, and even some who had silently encouraged her torment. Each name seemed to draw a pulse of heat downward, brushing the guilty with an invisible touch that made their skin tingle and their hearts pound with fear. Whispers of horror spread through the crowd, but the girl remained calm, her gaze fixed upon the torch as it did what she could not yet control: reveal the hidden sins of the village in blazing, inescapable fire. As more names appeared, the villagers began to recognize their neighbors, friends and relatives, all marked across the sky. Some screamed in denial, claiming the fire was a trick or that the girl had cursed them, but the writing continued unabated, each letter precise and perfectly formed. There was no hesitation, no fading. The torch burned steadily, its flame guided by an ancient, unerring force. Parents who had abandoned kindness, merchants who had cheated, and women who had whispered falsehoods were all named, their misdeeds illuminated for all to see. The sky above became a vast tapestry of truth. Letters connected to form phrases, detailing acts of greed, betrayal, and cruelty. The villagers could not hide, could not divert their gaze, for the fire illuminated not just the names but the essence of their actions. Each letter seemed to carry a weight, a subtle vibration that resonated in the bones of those below. Even the ground seemed to hum in response, acknowledging the magnitude of the revelation. Fear and awe collided in the hearts of the villagers. Some fell to their knees, covering their faces in shame, while others stumbled backward, unable to confront the fiery truth hovering above them. Children who had laughed earlier now clung to their mothers, sensing the gravity of the moment. Elders who had once scoffed at the girl's quiet nature, now whispered apologies to the night, though no one could undo what had been revealed. The torch's fire was not indiscriminate. It highlighted the cruel, the deceitful, and the envious, leaving the innocent untouched. Those who had tried to protect or comfort the girl remained unscathed, their names unmarked in the sky. The division between the pure and the guilty became painfully clear, a celestial judgment that could not be argued with. Even the stepmother, who had orchestrated much of the girl's suffering, saw her name carved in flames and collapsed, trembling, unable to deny the justice being revealed before her eyes. As the hours passed, the letters continued to appear, stretching across the horizon. They shone brighter with every name, forming a constellation of accountability. The villagers realized that the flame did not only reveal names, it revealed truth itself, a force beyond human authority, a voice of the ancestors speaking through fire. The girl's calm demeanor contrasted starkly with the growing hysteria of the guilty. She became the silent arbiter, the vessel through which justice flowed, her endurance now a source of awe and reverence. By the middle of the night, nearly every name of those who had harmed her had appeared, floating like burning constellations above the village. The effect was profound. Even the bravest men could not meet the gaze of the girl, nor the fiery inscriptions above. A hush settled over the crowd, the kind of silence that comes not from peace but from the weight of revelation. No one dared speak, for every word spoken might ignite further judgment. The torch's fire continued to burn steadily, and though the girl was weary, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The night had been long and punishing, but now the truth was undeniable. The village could see their sins laid bare, written in fire, impossible to hide. Even those who had tried to protect themselves through lies and excuses could not escape. The celestial script was perfect, flawless, and impartial, and its message was clear: cruelty, envy, and malice would always be exposed. As dawn began to approach, the fire's intensity softened slightly, but the letters remained visible, glowing faintly against the sky. The villagers, exhausted and humbled, realized that the girl had been chosen as a conduit for something far greater than their petty judgments. They had mocked, tormented, and sought to break her spirit, yet through their cruelty they had revealed their own guilt. The torch, once a tool of punishment, had become a harbinger of justice, and the girl, standing tall and serene, carried the flames with dignity, her suffering transformed into an eternal testament of truth. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, the sky remained etched with the burning names of the guilty. Villagers knelt, trembled, and wept, knowing their actions had been laid bare for all to see. The girl, her arms sore but her spirit intact, held the torch high one last time. Its fire had served its purpose, to illuminate the darkness of deceit, expose the hidden sins, and restore balance to a world that had long ignored the innocent. The night ended with silence, reflection, and awe. The girl had survived, not by anger or revenge, but by humility, endurance, and quiet faith. And the torch, now resting in her hands, had written its story in fire, a story that would be remembered for generations. The fiery names that hung suspended in the night sky did more than identify the villagers. Each name began to shimmer, pulse, and stretch into intricate patterns, revealing the hidden sins that lay behind them. The fire was no ordinary flame. It seemed alive, conscious, and attuned to the truth that humans had tried to conceal for years. As the letters burned brighter, they expanded into symbols, small illustrations, and fragments of memory, each one depicting the act of cruelty, greed, or deceit committed by the person whose name it bore. First, the thief was revealed. A wealthy merchant, who had secretly stolen from poorer neighbors and hidden valuables beneath his floorboards, now saw his crime illuminated above him. The letters of his name formed images of the pilfered goods, shimmering in gold and silver light, as if the fire itself was pointing to the stolen treasures. His face turned pale, sweat dripping from his brow, while villagers who had suspected him but lacked proof could only gape. Some whispered apologies, others murmured awe at the supernatural display, and a few simply fell to their knees in disbelief. Next, a liar's name burned into the sky. A woman known for spreading false rumors about her neighbors, accusing them of adultery, theft, or misdeeds to gain favor, now saw her lies illustrated in fiery script. Scenes of deception unfolded as the letters intertwined, showing her whispering false words and the resulting pain she had caused. The fire revealed not just her actions but the emotional toll, making the village feel the depth of her cruelty. Her hands trembled, her tongue could not speak fast enough to deny what the flames had revealed. Then came the cruel masters, those who had raised their fists against the weak, punished servants unfairly, or humiliated the poor. The fire projected the images of whippings, forced labor, and mocking laughter, all unfolding above the guilty, framed by their names in blazing light. Each illustration seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a life of its own. People gasped and recoiled, some backing away as though the heat could burn them as punishment for their silence or complicity. Even the envious stepmother and her malicious stepsister were not spared. Their names glowed with a fierce intensity, and the sins they had long hidden, denying food, mocking, orchestrating suffering, played out like a vivid tableau. The villagers could see the anguish of the girl they had tormented, her suffering amplified by the fire's retelling. The stepmother screamed, clutching her chest as though the torch's flames had branded her soul itself. The stepsister fell silent, her arrogance replaced by trembling shame. No one could hide. Even minor acts of dishonesty, selfishness, or betrayal that had seemed insignificant over the years were illuminated with startling clarity. A young boy who had taken a piece of bread from a neighbor, a man who had lied to gain a small favor, a woman who had scorned a widow, all their misdeeds shimmered in the air, interconnected with the larger web of wrongdoing in the village. The fire made it impossible to deny, impossible to ignore, and impossible to escape. Panic spread like wildfire. Those whose names glowed frantically looked around for the girl, hoping she had some hidden power to explain or stop the flames, but she remained calm, her grip steady on the torch. She did not incite the fire, she merely carried it. It was as if the ancestors themselves had taken control of the punishment, ensuring that every hidden crime, every whisper of malice, every act of cruelty was brought to light. The night sky became a stage for divine revelation. Names intertwined with symbols, hands clutching stolen coins, faces twisted in lies, figures kneeling in fear, and the effect was overwhelming. Villagers who had participated in wrongdoing turned on each other, pointing fingers, shouting accusations, and trembling at the evidence laid bare above them. Their panic was palpable, as though the night itself conspired against them. Amidst the chaos, the torch remained steady in the girl's hands. Her arms burned and sweat streamed down her face, yet she did not falter. The fire seemed to recognize her endurance and purity, flowing through her without consuming her, using her as a conduit to reveal the truths that had long been buried. The contrast between her calm and the villagers' panic was stark. The guilty ran in circles, tried to hide behind others, or fell to their knees in supplication, but the fire continued its unyielding work, leaving no one unmarked. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, nearly every hidden sin in the village had been revealed. The sky was a constellation of justice, names and deeds intertwined in blazing clarity. Even those who had tried to remain righteous, offering kindness where they could, were left unscathed, their names untouched by the fiery judgment. It was evident to all that the fire did not punish indiscriminately. It revealed truth and truth alone, guided by unseen hands beyond human control. The villagers were humbled, shamed, and silenced. Some wept openly, realizing the weight of their actions and the impossibility of escaping accountability. The girl, holding the torch with quiet dignity, had become a vessel of justice, a bridge between the ancestors and the living. Through her endurance, through her suffering, the hidden sins of the village had been laid bare, teaching a lesson that could never be erased. Deception, cruelty, and greed cannot hide from the light of truth. By the end of the night, the torch's flame began to dim slightly, yet the burning names remained visible against the sky, glowing softly as a reminder of the justice that had been wrought. Villagers knelt, bowed, and whispered apologies to one another, understanding that the girl's patience and humility had revealed what no human power could. The fire had written its judgment in the heavens, and the girl, standing strong despite her exhaustion, had carried it faithfully, her silent strength forever immortalized in the glow of the torch. The moment the torch's flames reached their peak, the sky seemed to split with a radiant brilliance, drawing every eye toward the girl and the celestial display above. Her stepmother and stepsister, the architects of so much pain and suffering in her life, found their names blazing with an intensity far surpassing all others. The letters glowed with a fiery crimson, edged in gold, flickering like living flames, dancing across the heavens in an almost hypnotic rhythm. Each letter was more than just a name. It carried the weight of the sins, the malice, and the long-hidden cruelties they had inflicted upon the girl and the villagers over the years. The stepmother's name ignited first. As the letters formed, the fire sculpted vivid images illustrating her acts of betrayal and oppression. Scenes of denying food, hoarding wealth, and forcing the girl into endless labor unfolded with meticulous detail, each image suspended in the sky for all to see. Villagers gasped and murmured in disbelief. Mothers clutched their children, recognizing the acts described in the fiery symbols as truth, stories they had witnessed but had been too afraid to confront openly. Fathers and elders whispered anxiously among themselves, their eyes darting to the stepmother, who now stood frozen in the center of the crowd, her face drained of color, hands trembling uncontrollably. Then the stepsister's name blazed forth, equally brilliant and unstoppable. The flames etched into the air scenes of envy, theft, and relentless mockery. The girl's shoes, stolen and paraded, appeared vividly within the fire as the ultimate symbol of her cruelty. Each step the stepsister had taken to demean the girl, every cruel laugh, every insult, was illuminated in fiery clarity. The stepsister's mouth opened in shock, attempting to speak, to deny the sins, but no words emerged. The fire had exposed every falsehood and every hidden malicious act. The villagers' reaction was electric. Gasps, whispers, and stifled cries swept through the crowd as they took in the enormity of the spectacle. Some stumbled backward, unable to meet the eyes of the guilty women, while others pointed, incredulous, as if to confirm what they were seeing. Even those who had previously supported the stepmother and stepsister's authority could no longer deny the evidence before them. The celestial display was undeniable, radiant, and indisputable. The fire did more than merely reveal names. It carried an almost sentient energy, emphasizing the weight of every sin. Each letter throbbed with the memory of past wrongs, pulsating with a rhythm akin to a heartbeat. The villagers could feel the oppressive energy radiating from the sky, a stark reminder that cruelty and greed are never hidden for long. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the collective shame of the stepmother and stepsister, as if the heavens themselves were condemning their actions. The girl, meanwhile, held the torch steadily, her posture calm and dignified despite the heat searing her hands and arms. She did not shout, she did not laugh, and she did not revel in the punishment of her tormentors. Instead, her serene expression contrasted sharply with the panic and terror below. In her quiet endurance, she became a living conduit for justice, a vessel through which the ancestors delivered truth. It was clear to the villagers that the girl had been chosen, not by force but by the purity of her heart, to carry forth this celestial judgment. As the flames etched the last details of the stepfamily's sins, their intensity seemed to increase further. The stepmother's greed, which had long driven her to hoard and manipulate, flickered and grew like a storm in the sky. The stepsister's mockery, fueled by envy and spite, danced in flames that seemed almost alive, curling and twisting with an eerie intelligence. Both women tried desperately to shield their eyes, but it was useless. The fire illuminated every shadow of their wrongdoing. Murmurs of awe, fear, and reverence spread quickly through the crowd. Some villagers fell to their knees, recognizing the power and righteousness that had manifested through the girl. Others trembled, understanding the heavy cost of cruelty and deceit. The celestial spectacle was both terrifying and beautiful, a radiant tapestry of justice that no one could ignore. By the time the torch's fire began to dim slightly, the names and sins of the stepmother and stepsister still lingered in the sky, glowing faintly against the darkening night. The women themselves were left pale, shaken to their core, unable to move or speak, confronted with the magnitude of their exposed sins. Their position of authority and perceived invincibility had crumbled entirely under the weight of the flaming truth. The villagers, now silent, turned their eyes toward the girl. She lowered the torch gently, her hands still steady, her calmness undisturbed. It was clear that she had not wielded the fire for revenge or personal gain. Rather, she had carried the torch as a conduit of cosmic justice. The stepmother and stepsister's terror was complete, their reputation and pride forever marked by the flames that had written their names across the heavens. Thus, the night became a legend, the night the girl bore the torch and revealed the sins of her cruel stepfamily. The village would never forget the lesson. Greed, cruelty, and envy, no matter how hidden, will always be illuminated in the light of truth, and the innocent who endure with patience and dignity may become the very instrument of justice that no human power can stop.